Someone asks you to do something, and every single part of you does not want to do it. Your stomach drops, your energy disappears, your brain is already exhausted just thinking about it, and you open your mouth, and you hear yourself say yes. Sure, of course, no problem at all. And then you spend the next 3 days resenting the commitment you just voluntarily and completely made yourself, where someone invites you somewhere you genuinely do not want to go, and you know you don't want to go. And instead of simply saying no thank you, you construct an elaborate excuse that feels less like a lie. Because saying I just don't want to feels somehow wrong, selfish, unkind, too honest for the situation. Or a colleague asks you to take on extra work that is clearly not your responsibility and clearly not fair. And you say yes anyway. And then you stay late. And then you feel quietly furious. And then you feel guilty for feeling furious. If any of that felt familiar in your chest, this video is going to explain something important about you. Today we are talking about the psychology of people who cannot say no, and why it goes so much deeper than being nice. Because here is what most people get completely wrong about this pattern, from the very beginning. People who can't say no are not weak. They are not doormats. They are not simply too agreeable by nature. They are people whose nervous system has learned that saying no carries a cost that feels too high to pay. And that lesson was not learned yesterday. It was learned early, and it was learned repeatedly, until it stuck. Psychologists call this pattern fawn response. It is one of 4 primary stress responses the body uses. Most people know fight, flight, and freeze, but fawn is the 4th one, and it is the least talked about. Fawn is what happens when the nervous system decides that pleasing the other person is the safest available option, not the most honest option, not the healthiest option, the safest one given what the brain currently believes. And for people who grew up in environments where conflict was dangerous or unpredictable, fawn became the default, where saying no led to anger, to withdrawal of affection, to tension that filled the entire house for days. The child in that environment learned something very specific and very fast about how to stay safe. Keep people happy, agree, accommodate, make yourself useful and easy, and never ever be the source of conflict. And it worked. The tension eased, the anger settled, the affection returned when they complied and cooperated, and the brain filed that result under permanent operating policy. This is how you stay loved and stay safe. Now let's talk about what is physically happening in the body when these people try to say no. Because it is not just uncomfortable. For many of them, it activates a genuine physiological stress response. Heart rate increases, chest tightens, a wave of something very close to fear moves through the entire body. The brain interprets potential conflict or disapproval as a threat, not metaphorically, literally as a threat. And the body responds accordingly, with the same urgency it would use to avoid something physically dangerous. So when people say just say no, it sounds simple because for them it genuinely and completely is simple. But for someone whose nervous system treats disapproval as danger, no is not a word, it is a risk calculation. And the calculation almost always comes back the same way. The cost of no feels higher than the cost of yes. Let's talk about what this pattern actually looks like in the daily life of someone living inside it. They are typically the most reliable person in every single room they walk into. Always, without exception. Need someone to cover a shift? They will do it. Need someone to listen at midnight? They will answer. Need someone to take on one more thing? Even though they are already completely overwhelmed, they will say yes. And people love them for it. Depend on them for it, build their expectations carefully around it over time, which creates a trap that becomes harder to escape from the longer the pattern continues running. Because now saying no doesn't just feel personally uncomfortable, it feels like breaking a contract with everyone. It feels like becoming a different and lesser and disappointing version of the person everyone counted on. And so they keep saying yes, past the point of capacity, past the point of fairness, past the point of health. Now let's talk about the specific emotion that keeps this entire cycle locked in place, and that emotion is guilt. People who can't say no experience guilt at a frequency and intensity that is genuinely disproportionate. They feel guilty for being tired, guilty for having limits, guilty for wanting something different than what others want. They feel guilty for the no they haven't even said yet, just for considering it, just for wanting to say it. And guilt is extraordinarily effective at overriding what a person actually needs in any given moment. Because guilt says you are being selfish, you are letting someone down, You are not being who you should be. And for someone whose identity is built around being helpful and available and accommodating, that hits very hard. Research shows that chronic people pleasers have significantly elevated baseline levels of cortisol over time. The body is under constant low-level stress from the ongoing effort of managing everyone else's needs and emotions. It is exhausting in a way that is genuinely difficult to explain to someone who has never experienced it firsthand. Because from the outside, they look fine, capable, even cheerful. They are very good at looking completely fine. But on the inside, they are carrying the weight of every yes they said when they desperately needed to say no. Let's talk about what this pattern does specifically to relationships over time, because the damage is real. It creates resentment. Slow, quiet, accumulating resentment that builds beneath the surface of every yes. They did not want to be here. They did not want to do this, but they came. But they did it, again. And they cannot be angry at the person who asked, because that person did not force them to say yes. So the anger turns inward, which is where it does the most damage over the longest period of time. There is also something that happens to the authenticity of their relationships when this pattern runs long enough. People around them fall in love with someone who does not entirely exist, a version that never says no, a version that is always available, always accommodating, always putting everyone else's needs above their own. And the real person underneath that version, with real limits and real needs and real preferences, stays hidden, which means they are surrounded by people who care about them but do not actually fully know them at all. And that creates a loneliness that is very specific and very hard to explain to the people causing it. Now here is something about people who can't say no that almost never gets acknowledged or celebrated properly. They are often the most genuinely empathetic people you will ever encounter in your entire life. Their attunement to other people's feelings is real, and it is deep, and it is not something they perform. They care, genuinely, completely, and that capacity for care is one of the most valuable things a person can have. The problem is not the caring. The problem is the belief that caring requires the complete erasure of self, that you cannot be a good person and also have a boundary, that love and limits cannot exist at the same time. But here is what psychology actually shows us about the healthiest and most sustainable relationships that exist. The people in them say no regularly, clearly, without excessive apology, and the relationships survive it completely. In fact, they survive better, because both people trust that yes actually means yes when it is finally said. A yes from someone who never says no means very little. It is the baseline. It is what is always expected. A yes from someone who says no when they need to means everything. It is a genuine and conscious choice. Learning to say no does not begin with a confrontation. It does not begin with a big dramatic boundary-setting moment. It begins with a pause, just a pause between the ask and the answer, a breath where the reflex used to live. In that pause, one question: do I actually want to do this? Not should I? Not what will they think? Do I want to? Because you are allowed to want things. You are allowed to not want things. That is not selfishness. That is being a person, and you have been allowed to be one this whole time. Subscribe if this finally said what needed to be said.